I'm Morgan, 29, a restaurant consultant who built my career from nothing. Tonight should have been simple, just dinner at Lumiere, the fanciest restaurant in town, for my mother-in-law Diane's anniversary. But when I arrived, something was off. The table was full, every seat taken, and Diane's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. No place for me. Oh dear, she said with a smirk, maybe a budget place suits you better. I felt my cheeks burn, then remembered exactly who I was. I burst out laughing. If you're enjoying family drama, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing your ground when family tries to put you down. My relationship with Diane was troubled from the moment I met her son Ethan during our sophomore year of college. We were taking the same business course, paired for a semester-long project. I was there on a partial scholarship, working 3 part-time jobs to cover the rest. Ethan, on the other hand, drove a BMW his parents had gifted him for his 18th birthday and lived in an off-campus apartment they paid for. None of that mattered to me. What caught my attention was his kindness, how he offered to study with struggling classmates, how he volunteered at the campus food pantry, and how he never once made me feel less than when I had to reschedule our project meetings around my work hours. He was nothing like the entitled rich kid I'd initially assumed him to be. We fell in love gradually, over coffee-fueled study sessions and late-night conversations about our dreams. I wanted to revolutionize struggling restaurants, having grown up helping at my aunt's diner that eventually closed due to competition from chains. Ethan wanted to use his family's wealth and connections in more meaningful ways than just accumulating more wealth. The first time Ethan mentioned meeting his parents, I was nervous but excited. They'll love you, he assured me, squeezing my hand. How could they not? Diane Preston lived in a world of country club memberships, charity galas, and social hierarchies. Their home was a sprawling colonial with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage, housing vehicles worth more than my entire childhood home. When Ethan introduced me, Diane's smile never reached her eyes. Morgan? That's an interesting name for a girl, she said, looking me over like I was a specimen under a microscope. And what does your father do? He's a mechanic, I answered proudly. Has his own shop now, but he started as an apprentice right out of high school. The slight narrowing of her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Throughout dinner, she peppered me with questions designed to highlight our class differences. Where I summered as a child, nowhere. We couldn't afford vacations. What clubs I belonged to, none, unless you counted the debate team, where I planned to intern. Wherever would hire me and work around my other jobs. Ethan noticed none of it, or if he did, he didn't recognize the subtle put-downs. His father Harold was kinder, asking genuine questions about my studies and seeming impressed by my work ethic. But Diane had made her assessment. I wasn't good enough for her son. Over the next few years, as Ethan and I grew closer, Diane's tactics evolved. She'd forget to invite me to family events, then act surprised when Ethan brought me anyway. She'd make comments about how refreshing it was that I wasn't concerned with appearances, right after I'd made an effort to dress nicely. She'd suggest career paths that would take Ethan far from our city and from me. After graduation, I secured a position at a restaurant consulting firm, starting at the bottom but quickly proving my value. I understood both the business side and the service side of restaurants in a way my more privileged colleagues couldn't. By 27, I was handling major accounts independently, traveling to help struggling establishments reinvent themselves, find their unique value, and become profitable again. Ethan and I married when we were 26, despite Diane's suggestion that we were rushing things. The wedding was smaller than what she'd wanted for her only son, but it was perfect for us. Ethan had joined his father's investment firm, but focused on supporting small businesses and ethical startups. We bought a modest but lovely home, determined to make our own way rather than relying on his family's money. Diane never missed an opportunity to remind me of my background. At every family gathering, she'd find ways to mention her club friends, her luxury vacations, her connections to prominent families, all while giving me those looks that said, "This is a world you'll never truly belong in." Ethan would sometimes notice and try to redirect the conversation, but more often, he'd miss the subtext entirely. "Mom's just being mom," he'd say when I'd point out her behavior later. "She doesn't mean anything by it." It was our only real source of conflict, his inability or unwillingness to see how his mother treated me. Last month, Harold had called to invite us to their anniversary celebration at Lumiere, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, with a 6-month waiting list for reservations. I'd actually done some consulting work for them recently, helping them update their service model and refine their menu offerings, but I'd never mentioned this to Diane or Harold. It wasn't about keeping secrets. It just never came up, and I didn't want to seem like I was bragging. "We'd love to come," I told Harold, genuinely looking forward to experiencing the restaurant as a guest rather than a consultant. A week before the dinner, Ethan received an emergency call from his biggest client. They needed him in Chicago immediately for what would likely be several days. "You should still go to the dinner," he insisted as he packed. "Dad went to a lot of trouble to get that reservation, and they're expecting us." "Are you sure? You know how your mom can be when you're not around to buffer." "It'll be fine," he promised, kissing me goodbye. "Maybe this is a chance for you two to bond a little." I'd spent hours getting ready for the dinner, choosing a sophisticated black dress that I'd splurged on for professional events, arranging my hair in an elegant updo, applying makeup that was polished but not overdone. I wanted to fit in, to show Diane that I could navigate her world with grace. As I pulled up to the restaurant, I took a deep breath. Just one evening, I told myself. You can handle Diane for one evening. If only I'd known what she had planned. Lumiere occupied the top floor of one of the city's most historic buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the skyline. The elevator opened directly into the restaurant, where a tuxedoed host stood behind an elegant podium crafted from a single piece of walnut. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" he asked with perfect professionalism. "I'm with the Preston party," I replied, "for Harold and Diane's anniversary dinner." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Ah, yes, right this way." As I followed him through the dimly lit restaurant, I admired the understated luxury, the hand-blown glass light fixtures, the original artwork on the walls, the immaculate table settings. Each table was positioned to create an intimate atmosphere while still offering stellar views. The soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of fine crystal created a sophisticated soundtrack. I spotted the Preston table before we reached it. Harold and Diane, Ethan's sister Rachel and her husband Colin, Harold's brother William and his wife Margaret, and two couples I recognized as longtime friends of the family. They were seated at one of the best tables in the house, near the windows with an unobstructed view of the city lights. Harold saw me first and stood with a warm smile. "Morgan, glad you could make it." Everyone turned to look at me, and I immediately noticed something was wrong. The table was set for exactly 10 people, and all 10 seats were occupied. "Morgan," Diane said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I wasn't expecting you." I looked around the table in confusion. "Harold invited us weeks ago. Ethan had to go to Chicago for work, but he insisted I should still come." "Oh dear," Diane replied, touching her pearl necklace. "When Ethan called to say he couldn't make it, I naturally assumed you wouldn't be coming either. I mean, it is our family celebration." She emphasized the word family ever so slightly. "I gave your spot to the Andersons," she continued, gesturing to a couple I didn't recognize. "They're just back from Europe, and we had so much to catch up on." "I didn't think you'd mind, especially without Ethan here." The table had gone uncomfortably quiet. Rachel looked down at her plate, clearly embarrassed. Harold's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sure we can squeeze in another chair," he suggested, starting to look around for a server. "Oh, I don't think that would work," Diane cut in smoothly. "We're at a complete table as it is, and you know how strict Lumiere is about their seating arrangements. Fire codes and all that." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe another time, dear." The heat of embarrassment crept up my neck. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see how I'd react. I caught Rachel's husband Colin hiding a smirk behind his wine glass. "Perhaps a more budget-friendly place would suit you better tonight," Diane suggested, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "There's a charming little bistro just down the street that I hear is quite accessible." The implication was clear. Lumiere was for people like them, not people like me. In that moment, I felt like the scholarship girl again, the mechanic's daughter who didn't belong in their world of privilege and prestige. I thought of all the times Diane had subtly excluded me, all the little comments and oversights designed to remind me of my place. This was just the most blatant example yet. "I see," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Harold at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Diane, surely we can." "It's really fine," she interrupted. "Morgan understands, don't you, dear? These things happen." I stood there, painfully aware of every second that passed, of the pitying looks from some and the barely concealed satisfaction from others. I thought about simply leaving, about calling Ethan in tears from the car, about never subjecting myself to Diane's cruelty again. I remembered something similar happening at Christmas 2 years ago, when Diane had accidentally excluded me from the family photo, and at Rachel's baby shower last year, when my invitation mysteriously got lost in the mail, until Ethan specifically asked why I hadn't RSVP'd. This was different, though. This was public, deliberate humiliation. This was Diane showing me once and for all that I didn't belong at her table, literally and figuratively. I could feel tears threatening, my throat tightening with the effort of holding them back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I wouldn't. And then something shifted inside me. A memory surfaced, one that changed everything about the situation. As I stood there, processing my mother-in-law's calculated exclusion, my mind flashed back to 6 months earlier. I'd been called in to consult for a struggling high-end restaurant that had recently changed ownership. Their reservations had dropped by 30%, and reviews were becoming increasingly critical. That restaurant was Lumiere. James Bennett, the new owner and executive chef, had been desperate when my firm connected us. He'd invested his life savings and taken on significant debt to purchase what had once been the city's premier dining establishment, only to watch it falter under his stewardship. "I don't understand," he told me during our first meeting in this very dining room. "I trained in Paris. My technical skills are impeccable. Why aren't people coming?" I'd spent 3 weeks at Lumiere, observing operations, interviewing staff, analyzing customer feedback, and reviewing their financials. The problems were subtle but significant. The menu had become predictable, the service overly formal and cold, the wine list overpriced and uninspired. Most importantly, James had been trying to replicate his predecessor's vision rather than establishing his own. "You're not connecting with your customers," I'd explained during our final presentation. "They're not experiencing your passion or your story. They're getting technically perfect food in a beautiful setting, but they're not getting you." Together, we'd revamped everything from the menu descriptions to the server training protocols. We'd adjusted the lighting, updated the music selection, and created signature dishes that showcased James's unique background and vision. I'd even helped him create relationships with local farmers and artisans to source unique ingredients that told a story. Within 2 months, reservations had increased by 40%. By 4 months, they were booked solid for 6 months in advance, and James's signature seafood dish had been featured in a national culinary magazine. We developed a friendship through the process. James had even invited me back several times to taste new menu items and give feedback. The last time I'd been here, just 3 weeks ago, he'd insisted on naming a cocktail after me, the Morgan, a sophisticated blend of bourbon, bitters, and house-made cherry syrup that perfectly balanced sweetness and strength. And now here I was, being told by my mother-in-law that I didn't belong in this very restaurant. A slow smile spread across my face as the absurdity of the situation hit me. Diane had no idea about my connection to Lumiere. She'd chosen this venue specifically to highlight the difference in our worlds, never imagining that I had played a crucial role in making it what it was today. I could have simply left, as she clearly expected me to do. I could have called Ethan and created a family conflict. Instead, I made a different choice. "Excuse me for a moment," I said calmly, turning away from the table before anyone could respond. I walked directly to the host's stand, where the maitre d', Michael, was reviewing reservations. He looked up as I approached, recognition immediately lighting his face. "Ms. Wells, what a pleasure to see you again. Are you here to meet with Chef James?" "Actually, Michael, I'm here for the Preston anniversary dinner, but there seems to be a misunderstanding about the seating. Is James available, by any chance?" "Of course. He's in the kitchen, but I'll get him right away for you." As Michael disappeared through the swinging doors to the kitchen, I glanced back at the Preston table. Diane was watching me with narrowed eyes, probably wondering why I hadn't slunk away in embarrassment as planned. The others had returned to their conversations, likely assuming I was arranging for a ride home or perhaps securing a table for one somewhere else. Less than a minute later, the kitchen doors burst open and James emerged, his chef's coat impeccable despite the dinner rush. At 40, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes, he had the confident bearing of someone who had found his calling. "Morgan," he exclaimed, loud enough for nearby tables to turn and look. He embraced me warmly, unconcerned about formality. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming in tonight? I would have prepared something special." From the corner of my eye, I could see Diane's jaw drop. Harold looked confused. The rest of the table had gone silent again, all eyes on me and the owner of the most exclusive restaurant in the city as he greeted me like an old friend. "It was meant to be a surprise," I explained, gesturing subtly toward the Preston table. "I'm actually here for my in-laws' anniversary dinner, but there seems to have been a mix-up with the seating." James's eyes followed my gesture, taking in the scene and quickly assessing the situation. Something in my expression must have communicated more than my words, because understanding dawned in his eyes. "A mix-up? At my restaurant? That's unacceptable." He turned to Michael. "Prepare table 12 immediately for Ms. Wells." Table 12. The chef's table. The best seat in the house, positioned to overlook both the city and the open kitchen, usually reserved weeks in advance for visiting celebrities or culinary critics. "James, that's not necessary," I started. "I insist," he said firmly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Nothing but the best for the woman who saved Lumiere." As James led me across the dining room, I could feel every eye on us, especially those from the Preston table. My mother-in-law's perfect plan was unraveling spectacularly, and I couldn't help the satisfaction that bloomed in my chest. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways. "Save Lumiere? Isn't that a bit dramatic?" I murmured to James as he personally escorted me to table 12, his hand lightly guiding my elbow. "Not in the slightest," he replied, pulling out my chair. "Without your help, I'd likely be back to working as a sous chef somewhere, drowning in debt from a failed investment." "You transformed this place, Morgan." The table was being rapidly prepared by two servers who seemed to materialize out of nowhere. A crisp white tablecloth was spread, elegant place settings arranged, a small vase of fresh flowers placed just so. "Tonight, you're my honored guest," James continued. "I'll have the kitchen prepare a special tasting menu for you. On the house, of course." "James, that's really not." "I won't hear any arguments," he said with a wink. "Michael will take care of you. I need to get back to the kitchen, but I'll come check on you later." As James returned to the kitchen, I caught sight of the Preston table. They were all staring, some with confusion, others with surprise, and Diane with barely concealed fury. The perfect seating arrangement for her anniversary dinner had been upstaged by her unwanted daughter-in-law being treated like royalty. Michael appeared at my side. "Chef has instructed me to offer you anything from our wine cellar. Perhaps the Chateau Margaux 2010? I believe it was your recommendation that we add it to our list." "That would be lovely, thank you, Michael." As I settled in, I saw Harold rise from his seat and approach my table. His expression was a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Morgan," he said, looking around at my premium placement. "What's going on? How do you know the owner?" I smiled. "I consulted for Lumiere 6 months ago when James took over. The restaurant was struggling, and I helped him turn things around." Harold's eyebrows shot up. "You did? I had no idea." Diane was telling everyone how impossible it was to get a reservation here, how she had to call in favors from the Whitmores. "Is everything all right, Mr. Preston?" Michael had returned with my wine. "Yes, I was just speaking with my daughter-in-law," Harold replied, still looking bewildered. "Ms. Wells is highly respected here," Michael said as he decanted my wine with expert precision. "Chef credits her with Lumiere's current success." Harold looked at me with new eyes. "I see." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to join us back at our table? I'm sure we can make room." "That's very kind, Harold, but Chef has arranged a special menu for me here. Please, go enjoy your anniversary dinner. We can catch up later." After Harold returned to his table, I saw him speaking intently to Diane, whose face had turned an interesting shade of red. The other guests were stealing glances in my direction, whispering among themselves. The first course arrived, a delicate amuse-bouche that wasn't on the regular menu, accompanied by a note card in James's handwriting, for the woman who taught me to tell my story through food. As I savored the exquisite flavors, Rachel approached my table next, looking sheepish. "Mom said you weren't coming," she said without preamble. If I'd known, she was pulling one of her stunts. "It's fine, Rachel," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "No, it's not. She's been doing this kind of thing to you for years, and none of us have really stood up to her about it." She glanced back at their table. "Colin thought it was funny at first, but even he's uncomfortable now. Mom's embarrassing herself. Would you like to join me?" I offered, surprising myself. Rachel and I had never been close, largely due to her loyalty to Diane. She looked tempted, but shook her head. "Better not. But maybe we could have lunch sometime? Just us. I'd like that." Throughout my meal, I noticed a shift in the dynamics at the Preston table. Harold was uncharacteristically quiet. The Andersons, the couple who had taken my seat, looked uncomfortable. William and Margaret were speaking to Diane in what appeared to be hushed but stern tones. By the time my main course arrived, James had emerged from the kitchen again to check on me. "Everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, though he knew his team never served anything less than perfection. "It's extraordinary, James. Thank you for this. The pleasure is mine. I'm testing some new dishes for the spring menu. I'd value your opinion when you have time." "I'd be happy to help." I was aware of Diane watching this exchange, her lips pressed into a thin line. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. In her carefully curated world, I was the outsider, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had somehow ensnared her son. But here, in this temple to culinary excellence that she had chosen specifically to exclude me, I was the insider, respected, valued, even revered. As the evening progressed, I noticed Diane becoming increasingly agitated. Her anniversary dinner, meant to showcase her social standing and simultaneously put me in my place, had backfired spectacularly. Instead of being the queen holding court, she was just another customer, while I was receiving special treatment from the owner himself. It all came to a head when the dessert course arrived at both our tables. Mine was an exquisite creation not on the regular menu, a delicate chocolate structure with gold leaf and house-made ice cream. The Preston table received the standard dessert offering, elegant but not personalized. That's when Diane finally snapped. This is ridiculous. Diane's voice cut through the refined atmosphere of Lumiere like a discordant note at a symphony. She had risen from her seat and was now storming toward my table, her anniversary dinner forgotten. Heads turned throughout the restaurant. The soft murmur of conversation dimmed as diners paused to watch the unfolding drama. Diane, Harold called after her, his tone warning, but she ignored him. She stopped at my table, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the back of the empty chair across from me. What did you do? Pull strings? Use Ethan's name to get special treatment. I set down my dessert fork calmly. Good evening, Diane. Would you like to join me? Don't play innocent, she hissed, lowering her voice but not her intensity. You planned this, didn't you? You knew I didn't include you in the reservation, so you came anyway and arranged this whole spectacle to embarrass me. I took a slow sip of water, giving myself a moment to control my response. Actually, I came because Harold invited us weeks ago, and Ethan insisted I should still attend even after his work emergency. I had no idea you'd removed me from the reservation. Then how do you explain all this? She gestured wildly at my table, the special dishes, the premium wine. The owner treating you like royalty? I believe I can answer that, came James's voice as he approached, alerted by the commotion. He extended his hand to Diane. James Bennett, owner and executive chef of Lumiere. You must be Morgan's mother-in-law. She's mentioned you. Diane reluctantly shook his hand, thrown off balance by his intervention. Yes, I'm Diane Preston. We're celebrating our anniversary tonight. She attempted to regain her composure, switching to the charming socialite persona she presented to those she deemed important. Your restaurant is exquisite. Thank you, James replied with professional courtesy. And thank you for being family to Morgan. She's quite extraordinary, isn't she? Lumiere wouldn't be what it is today without her expertise. Diane's smile froze. Her expertise? Of course. When I purchased this restaurant last year, it was hemorrhaging money and reputation. Morgan revolutionized everything from our menu development to our service protocols. That cocktail you're drinking? She helped create it. The seasonal tasting menu? Her concept. She even connected us with the local farmers who supply our produce. With each word from James, Diane's carefully constructed narrative about me crumbled further. The other Preston dinner guests had now gathered nearby, drawn by the confrontation, but staying to hear revelations about the daughter-in-law they'd been conditioned to view as an outsider. I had no idea, Harold said, looking at me with newfound respect. Morgan, why didn't you tell us you worked with Lumiere? I shrugged. It was just another client. I didn't want to seem like I was bragging. Just another client? James echoed incredulously. Morgan, you transformed this place. We've been written up in every major food publication in the country since implementing your recommendations. The ripple of whispers among the gathered family members was almost comical. Rachel was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. William and Margaret exchanged meaningful glances. The Andersons looked like they wished they could disappear. Diane remained frozen, her social mask slipping to reveal the calculation beneath. I could almost see her rewiring her understanding of who I was, who we were in relation to each other. Well, she finally managed. How interesting. I suppose your background in food service came in handy after all. It was a last, desperate attempt to maintain her narrative, to reframe my professional success as something quaint, something still beneath her. Something in me finally snapped. Years of subtle put-downs, exclusions, and condescension crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I stood slowly, making sure I was at eye level with her. My background, I said quietly but firmly, is in business strategy, market analysis, and operational efficiency. I have a master's degree in hospitality management from Cornell. I've saved dozens of restaurants across the country from bankruptcy. I've been profiled in Business Weekly and named one of the top consultants in my field. I took a step closer to her. But you've never bothered to ask about my career, have you, Diane? You decided who I was the moment you learned my father was a mechanic. You decided I wasn't good enough for Ethan, for your family, for your world. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch. That's not true, Diane protested weakly. I've always been welcoming. You've been anything but welcoming, Harold interrupted, surprising everyone. Morgan's right, Diane. You've treated her poorly from day one. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. That was wrong of me. Diane turned to her husband, betrayal written across her features. Harold, it's time for some honesty, Diane, he continued firmly. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating our 30 years together, but instead, you used it as another opportunity to exclude and embarrass Morgan. That's not the woman I married. That's not who we are. Diane's face flushed crimson. She looked around at the circle of family members, searching for an ally and finding none. Even her loyal daughter Rachel was looking at her with disappointment. I think, William said into the uncomfortable silence, that an apology is in order. All eyes turned to Diane. The perfect anniversary dinner she had planned was now thoroughly derailed, her social standing in this exclusive restaurant compromised, her family united against her behavior. I may have been hasty in my assumptions, she managed, each word clearly costing her. If I've made you feel unwelcome, Morgan, that wasn't my intention. It wasn't a real apology. We all knew that, but it was as close as Diane Preston had ever come to admitting she was wrong. Thank you, Diane, I replied with as much grace as I could muster. I appreciate that. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. James, sensing the tension, stepped in smoothly. Mrs. Preston, while your table is being cleared, perhaps you and your guests would enjoy coffee and digestives in our private lounge? On the house, of course, for your anniversary. Diane seized the lifeline, eager for an escape from the public humiliation. That would be lovely, thank you. As the group began to disperse, Harold lingered behind. Morgan, would you join us? I shook my head. I think I'll finish my dessert and head home. It's been quite an evening. Harold nodded in understanding. I owe you an apology, too. I've known how Diane treats you, and I've let it go on too long. That changes tonight. After they left for the lounge, James returned to my table. Well, that was dramatic, he said, sitting down across from me. Are you okay? Surprisingly, yes, I replied, realizing it was true. It's been a long time coming, actually. Family dynamics are complicated, he said wisely. My mother-in-law hated me for the first 5 years. Thought I wasn't stable enough as a chef to marry her daughter. What changed? He grinned. I got a Michelin star. Suddenly, I was acceptable. I laughed. So all I needed was a restaurant revolution to earn my mother-in-law's respect? Sometimes people only understand success in terms they recognize, he said with a shrug. Speaking of which, that offer to consult on our spring menu was serious. When you have time. As I finished my dessert in peace, I realized that something fundamental had shifted tonight. The careful power structure Diane had maintained for years had been irreversibly altered. It wasn't just about her learning of my professional success, it was about others in the family finally seeing her behavior for what it was. When I finally left Lumiere that night, I felt lighter somehow. The truth, even when it arrives through conflict, has a way of clearing the air. The morning after the dinner debacle, my phone began chiming with notifications before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. It started with a text from Rachel. That was wild last night. Mom's still in shock. Lunch next week? My treat. Then came an email from Harold, formal as always. Morgan, I want to reiterate my apology for last night's unfortunate situation. Diane and I would appreciate a chance to speak with you and Ethan when he returns. Please let us know when might be convenient. William's wife Margaret, who had always been polite but distant, sent a friend request on social media. The Andersons, who had unwittingly occupied my seat, sent a lavish flower arrangement with a note expressing their embarrassment at being unknowing participants in an uncomfortable situation. By midday, everyone from the dinner had reached out, everyone except Diane. Ethan called during his lunch break, concern evident in his voice. "Dad called me this morning. What happened last night? Are you okay?" I gave him the condensed version, trying to stick to facts rather than emotions. As I spoke, I could hear his breathing change, growing heavier with each detail. "I can't believe she did that," he said when I finished. "Actually, no, I can believe it. I just can't believe I've let it go on so long." "I'm so sorry, Morgan. You didn't know she'd pull something like this. But I knew how she treats you. I've known for years, and I've made excuses because it was easier than confronting her." His voice cracked slightly. "That stops now. I'm coming home early. My flight lands tonight." When Ethan arrived home, exhausted from his rushed travel arrangements, he held me longer than usual. "No more," he whispered into my hair. "No more letting her treat you like this." The next day, Harold called to invite us to their home. "Diane has something she'd like to say," he explained. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Harold, I don't know if I'm ready for another performance." "I understand your hesitation," he said, his tone unusually serious. "But I think this is important. For all of us." Ethan and I drove to the Preston estate in silence, both of us mentally preparing for whatever awaited. The sprawling colonial looked the same as always, immaculate and imposing, but something felt different as we walked up the familiar path to the front door. Harold greeted us himself, unusual, as they typically had household staff answer the door. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading us to the formal living room where Diane sat perched on the edge of an antique settee. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable than she had the night before. Her perfect posture remained, but there was a tightness around her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "Ethan, Morgan," she acknowledged as we sat across from her. "Thank you for coming." An uncomfortable silence followed. Harold cleared his throat pointedly. "I want to apologize," Diane finally said, each word clearly rehearsed. "My behavior at the restaurant was inappropriate. I should not have excluded you from the dinner, Morgan." Ethan tensed beside me. "That's it? After years of making Morgan feel unwelcome, after deliberately humiliating her in public, all you have to say is it was inappropriate." "Ethan," Harold began, but Diane raised a hand to stop him. "Your father and I had a long conversation last night," she said, looking directly at Ethan. "He helped me see that my behavior has been problematic." "Problematic?" Ethan echoed incredulously. "Mom, you've been borderline cruel to Morgan since the day you met her." "Why? Because her family doesn't belong to the right clubs? Because she worked her way through college instead of having it handed to her." Diane flinched at his words. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain it to me," he challenged. "Help me understand why you've spent 6 years trying to make my wife feel like she doesn't belong in this family." For a moment, I thought Diane might retreat behind her usual veneer of icy propriety. Instead, something unexpected happened. Her carefully constructed facade cracked. "Because she didn't need us," she said quietly. "You didn't need us anymore." Ethan and I exchanged confused glances. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Diane smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "From the moment you were born, everything was planned. The best schools, the right connections, joining your father's firm. We gave you everything, paved every step of your path." Her voice wavered slightly. "Then you met Morgan, and suddenly our plans, our world, wasn't good enough anymore. You started talking about making your own way and finding meaning beyond wealth." She looked at me then, really looked at me perhaps for the first time. "You were so self-sufficient. So confident in who you were, where you came from. You didn't want our connections or our lifestyle. Worse, you made Ethan question it too." The revelation hung in the air between us. All this time, I'd thought Diane's issue was that I wasn't good enough for their world. The truth was more complex. She feared I was pulling Ethan away from the life she had carefully constructed for him. "Mom," Ethan said gently, "I was questioning that path long before I met Morgan. She just gave me the courage to choose differently." "I never wanted to take Ethan away from his family," I added. "I only wanted him to be happy, to find fulfillment in his choices rather than following a predetermined script." Harold moved to sit beside his wife, taking her hand in his. "I've been telling Diane for years that success looks different for your generation. That making your own way is something to be proud of, not something to fear." "I'm trying to understand that," Diane admitted. "It's difficult to let go of expectations I've held for so long." It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of class consciousness and social conditioning wouldn't disappear overnight. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had stood between us for years. "I don't expect us to become best friends immediately," I said carefully. "But I would like to move forward with mutual respect." Diane nodded. "I think I can manage that." As we left the Preston estate that afternoon, Ethan squeezed my hand. "That was unexpected. Your mother apologizing?" "Definitely." "No," he said thoughtfully. "Her being vulnerable. I can't remember the last time I saw her drop the perfect socialite act." Over the following weeks, small changes indicated that Diane was making an effort. She called occasionally with questions about restaurants she was considering for lunch with her friends. She forwarded an article about a restaurant turnaround that reminded her of my work. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Rachel and I met for the promised lunch, where she shared stories about growing up with Diane's rigid expectations. "It was suffocating sometimes," she admitted. "Everything had to be perfect, had to fit the image she wanted to project." "That sounds exhausting," I said. "It was. Still is sometimes." She stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. "You know what the craziest part is? Mom comes from nothing. Her father was a janitor. She worked as a waitress to put herself through community college. She met Dad when she was serving at a restaurant near his law school." I nearly choked on my water. "Are you serious?" "Diane was a waitress." Rachel nodded. "She reinvented herself completely when she married Dad. Changed her accent, studied etiquette books, cut ties with her old neighborhood. She spent 40 years making sure no one knows where she came from." Suddenly, so much about Diane made sense. Her obsession with appearances, her hyper-awareness of class markers, her discomfort with my background that so closely mirrored her own origins. She hadn't rejected me because I wasn't good enough. She'd rejected me because I reminded her of the self she had worked so hard to erase. 6 months after the infamous anniversary dinner, Ethan and I hosted a gathering at our home, a housewarming of sorts, though we'd lived there for nearly 2 years. We'd recently completed renovations on our kitchen, transforming it into a space where I could experiment with recipes and host cooking classes for friends. "This is lovely," Harold commented as he accepted a glass of wine. "You've done wonders with the place." Our home was modest by Preston standards, a renovated craftsman with character rather than grandeur, but we'd made it our own, blending Ethan's appreciation for quality with my practicality. I watched as our guests mingled in the backyard garden. James had come with his wife Charlotte, bringing wine from a small vineyard he'd recently discovered. Rachel and Colin's 2-year-old daughter played with a neighbor's child on a blanket in the shade. My parents chatted easily with Harold near the grill, my father sharing tips on maintaining the vintage motorcycle Harold had recently purchased as a retirement project. And then there was Diane, perched somewhat stiffly on a garden chair, but present nonetheless. She was engaged in conversation with my Aunt Susan, who had taken over my late aunt's diner and turned it into a successful farm-to-table breakfast spot with my occasional consulting input. "Morgan." A voice pulled me from my observations. It was Diane's niece Zoe, a college sophomore studying hospitality management. "Could I ask you something about my internship applications?" "Of course," I replied, gesturing for her to follow me into the quieter kitchen. Since the night at Lumiere, Zoe had sought my advice several times, drawn to my career path in a way that surprised both of us. I have interviews with 3 different hotel groups, she explained, pulling up notes on her phone. But I'm not sure which would offer better experience for someone interested in restaurant development. As we discussed the pros and cons of each opportunity, I caught Diane watching us through the window. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small nod, acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. The relationship between Diane and me remained complex. There were still awkward moments, still occasions when her ingrained classism slipped through. But something fundamental had shifted. The revelation of her own humble beginnings had never been directly addressed between us. Rachel had sworn me to secrecy about that confidence, but knowing it had helped me understand her in ways I couldn't before. Later, as guests began to depart, Diane approached me in a quiet moment. "That marinade for the chicken was exceptional," she said. "Would you share the recipe?" "Of course," I replied, surprised by the request. "It's my grandmother's." Very simple ingredients, but the technique makes all the difference. She hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you could show me sometime." I used to enjoy cooking years ago. The admission that she had once occupied kitchens as a creator rather than just a director of household staff felt significant, a small piece of her true self revealed. "I'd like that," I said honestly. After all our guests had left and Ethan and I were cleaning up the last of the dishes, he wrapped his arms around me from behind. "That went well, I think," he murmured against my hair. "Better than I expected," I agreed, leaning back into his embrace. "Your mom actually ate my food without looking for invisible flaws." He chuckled. "Progress." We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about something." What would you think about starting a family soon?" I turned to face him, searching his expression. "Really? You're ready?" He nodded. "I think so. Watching you with Rachel's little girl today. I could see you as a mother. A great one. And what kind of in-laws will we be, do you think?" I asked, only half joking. "The kind that respect boundaries," he said firmly. "The kind that support without controlling. The kind that accept our children's choices, even when they're different from what we imagined." I thought about the journey with Diane, from rejection to reluctant acceptance to our current cautious rapport. I thought about how assumptions and fear had robbed us of years of potential connection. I thought about the healing that had begun, imperfect though it was. "I'd like that," I said, resting my head against his chest. "To break the cycle." Looking back on that night at Lumiere now, I see it as the turning point it truly was. Not because I won or Diane lost, but because truth finally broke through the careful facades we'd all maintained. Her illusions about who I was, and perhaps more importantly, her illusions about who she was, couldn't survive in the light of reality. The lesson wasn't that success earns respect, though that was part of it. The deeper truth was that authenticity, being genuinely yourself without apology, creates freedom that no amount of social positioning can provide. Diane had spent decades hiding her origins, curating a perfect image at the cost of genuine connection. I had nearly fallen into the trap of seeking her approval, of trying to fit into a world that wasn't mine. In standing my ground that night, in refusing to be diminished, I found something more valuable than my mother-in-law's acceptance. I found conviction in my own worth, independent of others' validation. Family relationships are complex tapestries woven from love, expectation, history, and hope. The threads that connect us can tangle and knot, creating patterns we never intended. But with patience and courage, even the most twisted patterns can be reworked into something new, not perfect, perhaps, but authentic and strong in its imperfection. As Ethan and I discuss our future family, I think about the legacy we want to create, one of acceptance rather than expectation, of support rather than control. I think about the kind of mother-in-law I might become someday, and I commit to remembering how it feels to be on the outside looking in. Have you ever stood your ground when someone tried to make you feel small? Did it change your relationship in unexpected ways? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've navigated challenging family dynamics. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice and standing in your truth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to shrink yourself to make others comfortable.